Welcome to the E-Pathshala lecture series in computer science. We are dealing with the subject computer architecture, and today we are going to look at what is called instruction set architecture. So, the objectives of this module is to understand the importance of the instruction set architecture, discuss the features that need to be considered while designing the instruction set architecture of a machine, and look at an example ISA for MIPS. Now, first of all, what is instruction set architecture? We have already seen that the computer architect course consists of two components, the instruction set architecture and the computer organization itself. So, the ISA specifies what the processor is capable of doing. So, the instruction set architecture is basically the interface between your hardware and the software. So, the only way that you can interact with the hardware is the instruction set of the processor. So, the instruction set processor commands a computer. So, in order to command a computer, you need to speak its language, and the instructions are the words of a computer's language, and the instruction set is basically its vocabulary. So, unless you know the vocabulary, you have a very good vocabulary, you cannot gain good benefits out of the machine. So, you need to know the computer's language. The computer's language is nothing but the instructions, and using these instructions you need to command the computer. So, the ISA is basically the interface between the hardware and the software. It is the portion of the machine which is visible to either the assembly language programmer or a compiler writer. So, whoever you are just an application programmer or even a compiler writer or an OS writer, whatever it is, the only interface that you have is the instruction set architecture, because the instruction set architecture is the specification of what the computer can do, and the machine has to be fabricated in such a way that it will execute whatever has been specified in your ISA. So, the only way that you can talk to your machine is through the ISA. Now, this gives you an idea of the interface between the hardware and the software. So, you have a high level program written in C. You have some statements written here in high level language, which is independent of the architecture on which you are going to work on. Now, this high level program is going to be translated into an assembly language program which is specific to a particular architecture. So, you find that this consists of a number of instructions like SLL, add, LW is a load, SW is a store, and all that. So, whatever you had written in terms of high level language now have been translated into a set of instructions which are specific to the MIPS architecture. Now, all these instructions that have been shown here are part of the instruction set architecture of the MIPS processor. Now, this will finally be converted to, again this SLL, add are all English like, and this is again not understandable to the processor, because the processor is after all made up of digital components which can understand only zeros and ones. So, this assembly language will have to be finally translated into machine language or object code which consists of zeros and ones. So, this is the translation from your high level language to your assembly language and then your binary code. Now, what we are going to look at is, when we look at the instruction set and the instruction set features of the instruction set, we will see what will go into these zeros and ones, how to interpret these zeros and ones as data or instructions or address, and so on. Now, if you look at an interface design, a good interface should last through many implementations. It should have portability and it should also have compatibility, and it should be used in many different ways. So, it should have generality, and it also should provide convenient functionality to other levels, and it should permit an efficient implementation at lower levels. Now, this just for giving you all an picture of the evolution of the various instruction set, starting from the single accumulator instruction set which was used in EDSAC in as early as 1950. Then you went into accumulator plus index registers in 1953, and then you had a separation of programming model from implementation. So, you had implementation based on high level language, based on general purpose register machine, so on and so forth, and most of the machines that are used today are based on the RISC instruction set architecture. So, this is just to give you a feel of the evolution of instruction sets. Most of these terminologies will be clear to you as we go through the other parts of this module. So, the major advances in computer architecture are typically associated with landmark instruction set design. Say for example, we had a stack implementation, stack based ISA that got implemented, and then we had a general purpose register based ISA, and then we talk about CISC versus RISC. So, design decisions that must be taken into account while designing the instruction set are: you need to worry about the technology, you need to worry about machine organization, you need to worry about programming languages, compiler technology, operating systems, and they in turn influence all of them. So, if you look at the classification or taxonomy of instruction set architectures, the ISA is basically classified based on the type of internal storage in the processor, how the operands getting stored in the processor. So, one is a stack based ISA, the second is an accumulator based ISA, and the third is a GPR or general purpose register based ISA. So, in a stack based ISA, we assume that all operands are available onto the stack and you operate on the top two elements of the stack. So, you do not have to specify what are the two operands. Simply if you give, for example, an add, if an instruction like add is specified, it assumes that it is going to add the top two elements of the stack and push the result onto the stack. The second class of ISA is an accumulator based ISA, where we assume that one of the general purpose registers is being designated as an accumulator, as a special register and accumulator, and one of the operands will always be available in the accumulator. So, if you have to add two numbers, you only have to specify where the other number is available, because the first number is always available in the accumulator. Say for example, if you want to add 5 and 10, put 5 into the accumulator and simply say add 10, because the other number you know is anyway going to be available in the accumulator. So, the third class of ISA is your GPR based ISAs, where you have three different classifications again there: a register memory ISA, or register register ISA, and a memory memory ISA, out of which the memory memory ISA is not used now. Both the register memory ISA and register register ISA are very popular, out of which the register register ISA or the load store ISA is very popular. All the RISC architectures follow the load store ISA or the register register ISA. So, the classification is based on the number of memory operands in an ALU operation. When you look at memory, you can have all operands specified as memory operands. When you look at register register ISA, you cannot specify any of the operands as memory operands. When you look at a register memory ISA, one of the operands can be specified as a memory location. So, that is the basis of classification, and it also depends on the total number of operands in an ALU operation. Are you going to specify all the three operands, the two source operands and the destination operand, or are you going to specify only two of the operands, a source and a destination, which obviously means that initially both of them will be treated as source operands and the result will be put back into one of the source operands that will form the destination operand. So, this gives you an example of the comparison of ISAs. Suppose if you have to execute the code sequence C is equal to A plus B. So, if it is a stack based ISA, you will have to first of all push A onto the stack, push B onto the stack, and then simply give an add instruction which will add the top two elements of the stack and then pop the elements the result onto C. If it is an accumulator based ISA, you will have to first of all say load A with the accumulator, add B. A is already available in the accumulator, so straight away add B and store the result in C. Similarly, if it is a register memory ISA, you will have to load one of the operands into a register R1 and then straight away add it with the other memory operand and store the result in a memory location. On the other hand, if it register register ISA, both the operands will have to be initially loaded from memory to your registers R1 and R2, and then add R1 and R2, put the result into a third register R3 and then store R3 into a memory location. So, the code sequence, as you can see from these examples, you have different ways of executing the same operation C is equal to A plus B. So, that obviously depends upon the ISA that you are looking at. Now, the registers are the class that have 1 out, and the more registers on the processor, the better. So, this gives you an example of the GPR architectures. It gives you the number of memory addresses, the maximum number of operands allowed, the type of architecture that is used, and example architectures. Now, once we have a feel of what an ISA is, first of all we are going to look at what are the different features that need to be considered while designing the instruction set architecture. So, first of all you will have to decide on the types of instructions. What are the various instructions that you are going to support in your ISA? Is my ISA going to have support for addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, logical operations and all that? So, define the various operations. What are the types and sizes of operands? Are you going to work only on 8-bit operands? Are you going to work on 16-bit operands? Are you going to work on decimal numbers? What are the different types of operands and how big are they? What are the sizes of operands? The third feature is the addressing mode. How are you going to specify an operand to the processor? Is the operand going to be available in a register? Is the operand going to be available in a memory location? If it is in a memory location, how are you going to specify the address of the memory location? So, all that defines what is called the addressing mode. And then how are you going to address your memory? That is another issue. And finally, how are you going to put all this into an instruction format? What is the encoding technique that you use? And finally, of course, the compiler related issues. Now, all these different features will have to be decided when you are designing the instruction set architecture of a processor. So, first of all, let us look at the types of instructions. Normally, we choose only the commonly used instructions, and you will have to look at making the commonly used instructions faster. Specialized instructions depend upon the application of the processor. Suppose if you are designing, we have already looked at the different classes of computer systems. Suppose if you are designing an embedded processor, which is meant to be performing a particular application, then definitely you will have to bring in a specific instruction which is specific to that particular application. Whereas, if you are designing a general purpose processor, you only look at including all general types of instructions. So, examples of specialized instructions may be media and signal processing. So, when you are looking at media and signal processing, you may have to bring in SIMD type or vector type of instructions which try to exploit the data level parallelism, where the same operation of addition or subtraction is going to be done on different types of data. And then you may have to look at saturating arithmetic operations, you may have to look at multiply and accumulate instructions. So, you either look at a general instruction set or you look at also including some specialized instructions based on the applications that you are targeting at. Now, categories of instructions and examples. So, you may look at arithmetic and logical instructions which will include integer arithmetic, decimal arithmetic, and also logical operations like AND, XOR, etc. You may look at data transfer instructions which will help you transfer data from one point of the machine to another point of the machine. You may also look at control instructions which will help you perform various branches, jumps, procedure calls, returns, and handle interrupts. You may also have system related instructions like operating system call, virtual memory management instructions. You may have floating point instructions which are used to handle floating point data. You may have decimal instructions which will be used to handle decimal data. Also string manipulation instructions and graphics related operands. The next one is types and sizes of operands. So, the common operand types are character, which is 8 bits, half word, which is 16 bits, word 32 bits, single precision floating point, which is one word of 32 bits, and double precision floating point, which is a 64-bit operand. And integers are normally 2's complement binary numbers. Characters are usually represented using the ASCII code, and floating point commonly follows the IEEE standard 754, and you can also look at packed and unpacked decimal numbers. So, the next feature that we will have to look at is memory addressing. So, how do we interpret memory addresses and what are the various addressing modes that you can support in ISA? So, when you look at interpreting memory addresses, you have basically have two types of interpretation, a big endian arrangement and a little endian arrangement. Normally memory is organized as bytes. So, one address, a unique address of a memory location is capable of storing 8 bits of information. But when you look at the word length of the processor may be more than 1 byte. Suppose if you are looking at a 32-bit processor, it is made up of 4 bytes. Now, these 4 bytes are going to be stored across 4 different memory locations. Now, when you specify the address of a word, how are you going to specify the address of the word? Are you going to specify the address of the most significant byte as the address of the word, or are you going to specify the address of the least significant byte as the address of the word? So, that distinguishes between a big endian arrangement and a little endian arrangement. So, when you look at the big endian arrangement, the address of the most significant byte is the word address, which is followed in your IBM 36070 Motorola series, the SPARC and the HPPA architectures. If you do it the other way around, if the address of the least significant byte is the word address, then it is called the little endian arrangement, which is followed on all the Intel processors. The other issue that we will have to look at is the alignment of data. See, normally when a data spans over different memory locations, say for example, a word of 32 bits spans over 4 memory locations and you are trying to access a word. So, if you try to access a word which is aligned with the word boundary, we say there is an alignment. If you try to access a word not starting at a word boundary, you can still access it, but they are not aligned. So, whether there is support for alignment, you are allowed to access data that is misaligned. Even if you are allowed to access data that is misaligned, normally it takes more number of memory cycles to access a data which is misaligned. That is what is called the alignment problem. The next feature that we will have to discuss with respect to an instruction set architecture is the addressing mode. As I previously pointed out, what you mean by addressing mode is the method by which you indicate to the processor where an operand is available. See, there are only basically 3 ways of specifying an operand to the processor in an instruction. The operand is either given directly, say for example, if you have to add 5 and 10, I straight away say add 5 to 10. So, that is one way of specifying the operand. The other way of specifying an operand is put these numbers into registers which are part of the internal storage of the processor and say that this register contains data. So, that is the second way. The third way is put these data in a memory location and somehow specify the address of the memory location to the processor. So, these are the 3 different ways, and based on how you can specify these 3 ways in different ways, you have different addressing modes. So, the first one is a register addressing mode, where you specifically say the values available in a register. Say for example, add R4 and R3. So, you are just adding the contents of 2 registers R4 and R3. The result will typically go back, because it is only 2 operands getting specified, the result will automatically go to one of the registers. If you specify the operand directly as part of the instruction itself, as given in the second row, add R4 comma 3, 3 is the operand itself, which is normally used for constants. This is called immediate addressing. So, the third type of addressing is now related to memory operands. So, suppose when I say add R4 comma 100 R1, you will have to somehow specify the address of a memory location. So, the memory location's address is got by adding the displacement 100 to a base value which is available in your register R1. So, adding the contents of R1 and 100 will give you the effective address or the address of the memory location where the data is available. This type of addressing mode is called displacement addressing, and it is normally used for accessing local variables. You can also look at a register deferred addressing mode, where the address of the memory location is specified in a register, and that is indicated by a register given within brackets. Say for example, when I say add R4 comma R1 within brackets, R1 does not contain the data here, R1 contains the address of the data. This is normally used when using a pointer or a computed address. Similarly, you can also look at absolute addressing, where the effective address is straight away given along with the instruction. So, when I say add R4 comma 1001 here within brackets, 1001 does not indicate a data here, it only indicates the address of the data. So, go to memory location whose address is 1001, you get the data, that will be your data on which you have to operate on. This is normally used for static data. Now, once you have decided on the types of operands, their sizes, the different types of instructions that you are looking at, and various things, addressing modes, you will have to pack all this in the form of an instruction format. So, you will have to look at instruction encoding. So, instruction encoding, you can look at a variable format or you can look at a fixed format. So, there are three basic variations: a variable format, a fixed format and a hybrid format. A variable format gives you a lot of flexibility. So, you can specify the number of operands that you have to have. If you need to have 2 operands, then give only 2 operands. If you have to have more than 2 operands, say 3 operands, then you can specify all the 3 operands here, and depending upon that, the length of your instruction varies. When you are looking at a fixed format, all instructions have the same length. So, suppose if you have 2 address fields, it may be a 2 address field, it may be a 3 address field, whatever it is, it will fit within only that particular length of an instruction. Say for example, if you are looking at a 32-bit instruction, all instructions will be only of 32-bit, that is a fixed format. Hybrid format tries to arrive at a compromise between the fixed format and the variable format, because the fixed format is very rigid, variable format is too flexible. You may have instructions which are of single bytes, you may have instructions which run to multiple bytes of length. So, you try to hit a compromise between the two and come up at a hybrid format, where you have only very few formats which are allowed, say 2 or 3 different formats which are allowed, and all instructions will have to be fitted within this instruction format. And finally, looking at the role of compilers, the compiler has a lot of role to play when you are defining the instruction set architecture. Gone are the days where people thought that compilers and architectures are going to be independent of each other. So, these days only when the compiler knows the internal architecture of the processor, it will be able to produce optimized code. So, the architecture will have to expose itself to the compiler, and the compiler will have to make use of whatever the hardware has exposed. So, when you look at the goals of the compiler, you will have to obviously know that all correct programs should execute correctly. The most compiled programs should execute at a very fast rate. So, you should be allowed to do optimizations, you should have fast compilation, and you should also have debugging support. So, when you look at optimizations performed by the compiler, it may be high level optimizations that are done, or local optimizations that optimize code within only a straight line fragment. So, the basic rules for optimization are, with respect to the compiler writer, basic rules that the hardware can provide support to the compiler are regularity, orthogonality and composability. So, when you do a giant case analysis, when the compiler does an analysis of a big program, it may have too many options that may have. So, it becomes very hard for the compiler to make choices on which path to choose. So, if the architecture is able to give some options to the compiler, some indication that this would be a better option, then it will be very useful to the compiler. So, that is essential, and that is what is called composability, and you need to also have orthogonality. Orthogonality is your operations, the addressing modes and data types should be orthogonal to each other. You should not say that this instruction will operate only on this data type and it will use only this addressing mode. You should say all operands, all operations can be done on all types of operands with all addressing modes. Then it becomes much easier for the compiler designer. So, you should not be able to bring in a lot of restrictions, then things become very complicated for the compiler. So, as an example, we do a case study of the MIPS architecture here. So, having studied the various features that go into an ISA, namely the types of instructions, the types of operands and their sizes, how the memory is organized, the different types of addressing modes, how an encoding can be done, what type of encoding format you use, and whether you give some support to the compiler for the compiler to perform certain optimizations. We now look at an example case study, which is the MIPS architecture. So, the basic characteristics of your MIPS architecture is that it is basically a RISC architecture. It is a it follows a load store ISA, which is a register ISA. It's called a register ISA because the operands can operate only on register operands. I can have an instruction like add R1, R2, R3. So, all arithmetic or logical operations will have to be done only on registers, and in order to bring information from memory or in order to write information onto memory, you have what are called load and store instructions. So, load and store are the only instructions which will allow you to have memory operands. So, all these instructions are 32-bit instructions or 64-bit instructions depending on which MIPS architecture you are looking at. All are 32-byte address aligned. You use only load store type ISA. It supports displacement addressing. It supports all standard data types. There are only 3 fixed length formats. You cannot look at any other format. So, there are only it is a fixed length format, and you have 3 templates which all have fixed lengths, and you have 32 64-bit general purpose registers with register R0 is equal to 0. You have 32 floating point registers, you have a floating point status register, and there are no condition codes supported here. The addressing modes that are supported in your MIPS architecture are immediate addressing, displacement addressing. Immediate addressing, if you recall immediate addressing allows you to specify an operand as part of the instruction itself. Displacement addressing is wherein you have a base component specified in a register and a displacement given along with it. So, if you add the displacement and the base given in your register, you will get the unique effective address of the memory location, and the register mode is used only for ALU operations. So, if you look at the data transfer instructions here, you can load and store a word, you can load or store a byte or a half word, it can be signed or unsigned data. Similarly, you can load and store a floating point operand, which is either a single precision floating point operand or a double precision floating point operand. And it also allows you to perform data transfers between the general purpose registers and the floating point registers. So, you have a number of general purpose registers and you have a number of floating point registers. So, you have data transfer instructions which will allow you to do data transfer between these 2 sets of registers. Similarly, when you look at arithmetic and logical operations, you can add or subtract signed numbers or immediate operands. You can similarly multiply or divide signed and unsigned numbers. You can perform logical operations like AND, OR, XOR, immediate, shifts, etc. on all these data types. If you look at the control instructions, you have a branch on equal to 0, branch not equal to 0. You have conditional branch testing, you have jump and jump register instructions, you have a jump and link register, you have a trap return from exception instructions. Now, when you look at branching, when you have a control flow instruction, the control flow can either be an unconditional control flow or it can be a conditional control flow. Say for example, when I do a jump, you may either test for a particular condition and based on that condition you can do a jump, or without testing for a condition, in any case do a jump. That is what is the difference between a conditional jump and an unconditional jump. Most of the processors have some conditions like the sign bit or a 0 bit which is used for conditional checking. So, similarly here you can also have a conditional branch testing or an unconditional branch testing. Similarly, when you do subroutine calls, one way of doing it is jump and link. So, you can, when you jump from one location to another location because of a subroutine call, you need to have some means of coming back to the original program. It is not an unconditional normal jump where you do not have to return to the main program. It is a subroutine call. It is a jump for a subroutine call. So, in which case you will have to return back to the main program. So, the return address can normally be stored in a register. There are different ways of doing it. Some architectures, Intel architectures for example, store the return address onto a stack and you retrieve it from the stack when you encounter a return instruction. The MIPS architecture uses a link register where the return address is put into a link register, and when you encounter a return, you use the return address from the link register and return. Similarly, when you are looking at floating point operations, you have add, sub, multiply both on single precision as well as double precision. You have certain conversion instructions, so on and so forth. So, this gives you a feel of the instruction formats. As I already pointed out, there is a fixed format where you have 3 different formats. So, to summarize this module, we have looked at the importance of the ISA design. So, unless you know what is meant by an instruction set architecture, you cannot interact with the hardware, because that is the only interface you have between the hardware and the software. It basically specifies what the processor is capable of doing. So, having said that, we will have to look at the various features that need to be decided while designing the ISA. So, we looked at different types of features that need to be decided while designing the ISA. We also looked at the classification or taxonomy of ISA, which depends on the number of operands that get specified and the number of memory operands that are normally allowed in the processor. And finally, we looked at an example ISA, the MIPS ISA. Thank you.